Twitter at Faith, the letter N, whatever. I think we're up to almost 40 YouTube subscribers, so that's pretty spectacular. We know we're doing well once we beat Garrett's channel.
Hey, we're going to lose one after this one comes out.
That's what we're going for. No way, we're going to gain so many more, like the weird kind of people.
I'm making a video on my channel to highlight and talk about this channel.
Excellent.
That'll bring over all
Inception YouTube.
5.
Make a video about the video.
Yeah. So I am Josh_Carmen at TStudentLife, at JamesYUILE, at Marion Ranch. If you want to find out more about Chris's music and what he does as a composer and for a living, don't look at the camera because we don't want them to see your face. It's like a running... What? So faithandwhatever.com, and feel free to connect with us there. We would love to hear from you. So on to the news.
Hold on, I have some snacks for everybody.
Okay.
Dill pickle
I'm not
flavored.
eating these.
Dill pickle
I'm not eating these.
flavored.
Circus animals? I got circus animals.
Oh my gosh, do you?
No.
That sounds so good.
You have to try everything that I bring on,
Okay,
on the show.
I'll try what Chris brought to the show.
No. You have to try everything I bring, regardless of if you like it or not.
No,
Parsnip and coconut flavored chips. No, not coconut flavored. Oh, those are not very good.
If you don't like them,
No, they're not.
I just thought they would be a lot better than that.
actually, those aren't bad.
Well, because they don't have a lot of flavor.
Shut up.
These are the kind of you could lose a tooth on
crap.
these.
You get what?
You could lose a tooth on these.
Put that
They're
back.
okay.
Put those back. I don't want that.
They're okay. They're just not. I was hoping for more pickle and less
Chris and I brought
cracker.
Barnum's Animal Cracker. You can like still taste it. Barnum's Animal Crackers.
Never heard of those. Is that what? Is that what craft?
You've never had animal crackers?
No, I'm just kidding. I have.
These are made out of graham. These are, I don't know.
Graham.
It's like the sedimentary of graham. Eat it. There you go.
Oh, all the preservatives.
Nice. Your beard is so sexy.
Are we filming a podcast or
Yeah.
what are we doing?
This is the food segment of the podcast. Pay attention. Man, if you can't see us, if you're listening to us on radio, that sucks for you. You should really consider...
All right, for my radio friends.
Oh, there we go. I was wondering what we were going to think about the audio sound.
Yeah.
of
Here's
chewing.
20 minutes of crunching.
It's so good.
Great.
That was a really good one. That was very clear and crisp. We could sell that for
This is a
sound effects.
either a Peruvian warthog or
Looks like a
Dominican...
capybara.
No, I think it's a Dominican otter. So this is the endangered Dominican Republic otter. And it's different than your typical Cambodian otters because the way they swim is they're propelled by their beaver anal glands as it moves them across the water as they forage for their food and away from their prey. It will attack you, so be sure to attack it first. And so these are good. I'm going to eat these whole things, so I better just give these back to you, Chris. All right. So on to the news story. Coming at you. Hiya! This is pretty important because it's happening in the UK right now. So, the title of this article, How Much Are Junior Doctors Paid and Why Are They Threatening to Strike? Just listen for a second and then chime in here. As the British Medical Association prepares for industrial action, ending the first, quote, all-out strike by medics in the history of the NHS, we examine the issues. This is written by Asa Bennett and Laura Donnelly, and this was published earlier in March. Junior doctors are on the verge of their third spell of industrial action with a string of sustained strikes that are planned. Medics have already withdrawn all but emergency action for two 24-hour periods that occurred on January 12th and 10th of February. The BMA also threatened full walkouts but canceled these while talks were ongoing with the government. Now these talks are off, but the three new round of strikes totaling or equaling a total of 6 days are planned. So in each case, the junior doctors will withdraw all but emergency care for 48 hours, resulting in thousands of operations being canceled. So far, each 24-hour period of strike action has meant around 3,000 operations being canceled, along with thousands more outpatient appointments. So they're angry. Why are they angry? That it's withdrawing from talks because they have seen pay cuts of up to 30% and the slashing of premium rates for doctors working between 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. on every day apart from Sunday.
Any numbers on what their pay actually is?
Let's take a look.
Because like if it's 30% on quite large pay, I'd feel less bad. But
I think it was 23,000 was the starting, 22,000 pounds.
That's what.
That's nothing.
That's what it's looking like. Yeah. So salary,
that comes out
average
to like
basic
35
salary
to 40,000.
So the deal imposed on
Dollars.
the junior doctors, average basic salary increase of 13%. So the basic starting salary would go up. This is what they want. Would go up to $27,000 as opposed to what they are currently being paid,
Wow.
£22,636.
That's nothing.
$36,000.
Which one is the
23,000.
Yeah.
The 23,000
And
pounds
things
is
are so
equivalent
much
to-
more expensive
Wow.
in the UK.
Yeah, so
It's not just that, like their money is worth more like in trade, but when you're in the country, things are very pricey.
Yeah, so check this out. Right now they're making 22.6, and they're currently
That's
working.
their starting pay. I mean.
Yeah, and they're currently working up to 91 hours a week.
What? That's insane.
Yeah, and so they want that cut back to 72 hours a week, which is three
That's
straight.
fair.
That's 3 straight days of work. It's just that's just insane. So it really does beg the question. And Chris brought this up. It was a great thing to get the ball rolling. These are legitimate issues. There, I mean, these are terrible wages for the amount of hours being worked in. But these people are also medical professionals, and humans in their society depend on these people for care, for nourishment, for tips and tricks on how to get better, blah, 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 all the important things that we understand doctors do and their vitality to our society. So is it ethical for them to strike? How do we deal with that, right? How do we
Because
look
when
at
I
that?
saw this article, I mean, there's been a lot in our politics lately about national health care and all that. And so I didn't really want to talk too much about that because I don't think we're going to solve that between the four of us.
Well, no. That's incorrect.
But-
we could solve that between the four of us. Nobody would just listen to us
Because we can't solve it.
because 4 white guys have the answers to everything.
But it's interesting to me
Hoorah,
that,
imperialism.
that when you have a job that is a matter of life and death, because I mean, I love my job and I'm a one-man business. So if I miss a day of work, I might have clients mad and I might lose a little bit of money, but nobody's going to die.
I
But
mean,
when you have the type of job where people could die, how do you balance that with still needing to take action to protest?
That's a tough
Bad work
conundrum.
conditions.
Because, I mean, if those numbers are accurate, they're getting dismal pay for a very important and stressful job,
Yeah,
a trying
difficult.
job that also takes quite a bit of education
Yeah.
to get.
Why would you want to be a doctor there?
Right. So, like, what option do you have to make change except for something like striking? But at the same time, there is the ethical conundrum
Right.
that if you strike, I mean, it's quite possible, it's probable that somebody dies because they need emergency medical care on the day you strike.
But if you don't strike and fix the conditions, I read one story where a doctor was talking about he was found having a conversation with a patient in a hallway, and it turns out that there was no patient there. He had just been at work for like 30 hours. He was talking to people that no one else could see.
that's terrifying. Well, this is interesting. It says, however, the increase in basic pay is not an increase in overall earnings. Rather, it would offset losses from other changes in the contract that they already have, such as the lower earnings attached to working evenings and weekends. There, so I mean,
Lower earnings? Yeah, so there's a premium
So
for
they-
working. They make more if they work during the day.
they make more if they, yeah.
No, if they work, like,
if
nights
they work
and weekends.
nights and weekends, they make more as opposed to
Right.
working standard business hours. So they're trying to just get kind of to scratch, is what it sounds like there. So what do you think? I mean, I don't know. You got an answer, James?
I don't have an answer at all. That's a tough place because you want to hold medical professionals up to a certain standard, but at the same time, it seems like the field is failing them too, right? So I don't think there is an answer from me on this one. I know that such a thing would be
And-
far less possible in America because of the verbiage here. I won't be able to remember, but we have the sort of the ethical code,
Hippocratic oath.
Right, that's the Hippocratic Oath. That this would basically...
That was my guess for 20 questions.
Something
today.
like this would fly in the face of the Hippocratic Oath, and then that would call into question all kinds of things.
And just for a little bit of more context, right? So they're starting at 22.6, and when they rise to experience within 4 years, they only go up to 30,000 pounds. So it's not like we're seeing like an exponential increase here to 50,000, 60,000 pounds. So I mean that is more. So
especially when you consider the hours they're working.
right,
though.
right. So at 90-ish hours, even 80 hours, there just to be a little bit on the safe side. What do you think, Garrett?
I mean, there's got to be some context. I'm just a little confused. I don't know what a junior doctor is.
That the junior doctors there are the people basically out of med school and then working at the hospital. I guess it'd be similar to a residency here.
Okay.
I don't know exactly
And it seems
what the
really
comparison is.
that amount of money for 91 hours is poverty levels. I would think, especially in some place like London, minimum wage almost 91 hours divided by $36,000.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's not sustainable. So even if it seems like there's some kind of system maybe of pay your dues kind of deal. Like, okay, well, we all went through that. So we're going to keep that because we're weeding out maybe those who aren't committed to the medical profession. I'm not condoning that behavior by any means, but I'm just saying there must be some type of tradition in which this is acceptable for someone to have to work that
I
much
think
for that
it's
little
a
pay.
growth thing because they do have national health care, and then more people have been getting covered, but there hasn't been as much incentive to become a doctor. So now it sounds like there's a doctor shortage, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems like they did I don't know anything about this specific situation, but they mentioned that except for emergency situations, the fact that procedures were canceled, 3,000, that makes me think that a lot of these doctors were performing surgeries, which you would
Those
expect.
are 3,000 surgeries specifically.
Yeah, that's crazy that these
Non-life-threatening
type of
surgeries.
people are getting paid so little, and they're also the ones who are responsible for completing surgery.
And they're so overworked.
Yeah, I wouldn't even want a doctor performing surgery who's worked.
He's on his 90th hour that week.
No kidding. So
Yeah,
trainee
yeah.
doctors versus other graduate professionals. We have the doctors starting around 22 make less than accountants, engineers, lawyers, and even some retail jobs. So the only people that they're really beating are the public sector, public sector workers, and they have to go to school longer than all those other jobs. So just something to think about. I guess, can pastors strike?
No.
Is that a thing, or do
They
they
can get
just,
fired if
do
they
just
want.
get replaced?
Well, because I wondered about that, because watching as our dad grew up, he gets calls all hours of the night. There's no off hours for a pastor, but you still have to set your own boundaries. Otherwise, you go crazy or you work yourself to death, and that's not good for you or your family. But so I wondered if that was a little bit of a tie-in for you guys.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where to take that, because even in my first year of marriage, I've had to figure out like what do boundaries look like for me, because I'm used to receiving that same type of understanding. Because for our example, kind of ministry just always was there, and I remember growing up, it's 11:30 at night, and my dad would be on the phone praying with somebody or talking, or and that wasn't uncommon. It wasn't an everyday
not every
thing,
day,
but it happened enough to where it's like, oh yeah, that's kind of normal. He's on the phone.
Well,
He's
and
counseling
these are,
someone.
in a way, themselves life and death situations for some people.
Yeah, and so there is a severe magnitude with some of the issues that you have to deal with, right? Cheating, whatever it might be, marital unfaithfulness, or emergency room visits there. And so, I don't really know. I don't even know how to set my own standards in terms of like, okay, when I'm turning my phone off, when I'm not answering any more ministry-related emails, because they do come at, kind of all hours of the day. So I don't know. Clearly not as physical or temporal as the things that the doctors are, certainly facing. Our issues are, obviously a different set.
But the fundamental question is not so much your work hours, but the ability to strike to raise awareness for some type of injustice that would be happening within a church institution.
Yeah, does pastoral injustice exist? I don't know. I doubt it.
Well, maybe it could at a denominational level or at a large church, say like Mariners or Saddleback, where they have hundreds of pastors maybe, and all of them got together.
So they have
and
a
said-
pastors union?
I don't think they have a pastors union.
PU.
But I guess the question that we can apply is that you don't need to be in a union to strike. Maybe just
Right.
similar work experiences, or not similar workplace. James, what do you think? Do you think a denominational level, if pastors felt like they were being treated unfairly, that a strike would be an option, or at a large church?
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about pastors striking. I feel like I have to think about it more. I feel like there's a conflict of interest in that.
Yeah.
Because you don't become a pastor for those. You become a pastor because you.
I
believe
became a
it's-
pastor to strike.
because you believe strongly in the Great Commission. Like that's the primary reason to become a pastor, and you don't really strike the Great Commission. I would say that for pastors, a better option is if you're not being treated fairly where you are, then you need to consider getting either a different job or either in a different field or at a different place, so a different church or whatever like that.
Let me give an example. This could be a stretch of the definition of striking, but let's say you're Catholic priest and you don't like the way that the Catholic Church is handling some type of situation with child molesters, and so together you decide that to raise awareness, you're going to strike. You and your other priests who think that your or your governing body isn't doing a good job of handling something.
I don't.
And you'll strike, and you're going to strike and not go to work until they handle it.
I don't think you're going to get the results you want in that situation, because the point of a strike is it puts pressure on the bosses, on the employers, because they need you to work in order for them to have an income.
Mm-hmm.
But in a pastoral situation, I don't think that's what happens. I think you strike, and there's no pressure being put on, let's say, your bishops or your archbishops or whoever your upper leadership is, in the same sense, because they don't need you for an income for the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
People still will continue to go to church and give to that church, and they'll just either put a replacement there to do your job, or somebody in that church will just kind of fill in. So it doesn't have the same effect that you would want.
Not like factory workers.
I was wondering, have you guys ever seen? There's it's almost like blackmail, like telling these doctors, you have to go to work, otherwise people will die, and it doesn't matter if we're going to work you into an early grave, you have to go do this. Have you ever seen kind of an emotional or a spiritual equivalent in the church, where a pastor might be overworked or something?
All pastors are overworked.
Well, yeah.
I don't want to say all, but I've so many pastors that I know
My job's
are
pretty chill.
overworked.
There's a bit of that kind of like almost an emotional or spiritual blackmail, saying, well, yeah, we know that these conditions aren't ideal, but I mean, you're doing it for Jesus, so you got to keep doing it.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I mean, not like that, but let me tell you what does happen, and I see this a lot, is that if you're a pastor, you know that the most important part of the job is not I'm talking about as far as like what is good to do, how is it good, how should you spend the great deal of your time, and that's with the interpersonal relationships, but that's not really how you're getting judged. How you're getting judged is when you get up to the pulpit.
Performance.
How do you perform?
Right.
So you know that you really should be meeting people one-on-one. You know that you should be ministering to people interpersonally. But there's a pressure upon you to push that aside to prepare a great deal of the week for how you teach or preach. And that's what's going to protect your job, is doing a great job there, because that's how 90% of your sort of occupational review is going to come. It's going to come from people seeing you from the pulpit and making a judgment call there. But that's really the least important part of the job, is the pulpit. It's where you really have the least effect. I mean, here's the truth. I've preached a few hundred sermons, at least. And people remember maybe the last couple things I say in each of them.
There was actually a stat that came out, I think it was from Pew Research Center. I'll have to link it. I'll link it in the thing, but it was like 90% of congregants forget what is said by Monday.
Yeah.
Could remember
that was
anything.
delivered on Sunday.
Which
Ironically, I can't remember the stat.
Which means it's
but-
not effective. As a pastor, you're not doing much when you're preaching. All you're really doing is protecting your job. That's all you're really doing from the pulpit. The real work, the real pastoral ministry work, happens interpersonally. It's your interactions with individuals. It's when somebody's sick that you're visiting them and you're shepherding them. It's when people are going through great distress in their lives that you're coming into that and hopefully bringing more peace to that situation. It's when somebody is passing away or a family member is passing away, you're working through that, or somebody's getting married and you're helping with the wedding itself, but also helping with the marital counseling. I mean, this is where the real work gets done, but you're never really reviewed on those things.
Right.
You're reviewed on what is it like for those 20 minutes when you
how
talk.
well do you hold an audience's attention?
Yeah.
How good are you at storytelling?
Yeah.
Your oration skills. Well, speaking of that, this is pretty interesting. Andy Stanley, Pastor Andy Stanley, big North Point Church in Georgia. They're a great storyteller. I love a lot of his work. Recently, he was criticized for some remarks that he
This was
made.
bad.
And I
Yeah,
might argue
this was
that I might
bad.
argue that it's not as bad as you guys think it is. But
That's really bad.
here's the quote.
Let's argue.
What's that?
Let's argue.
Yeah, okay. And so this is one reason why we build big churches, Andy said in one of his sermons. Why do you have to make them so big? Well, let me tell you why. We want churches, quote, and this is all quote, by the way, we want churches to be large enough so that there are enough middle schoolers and high schoolers that we don't have one youth group with middle school and high school together. We want there to be so many adults that there will be so many middle and high school kids that we can have two separate environments. Stanley then went on to criticize adults who prefer to go to a congregation that only has, I just lost the link. Where did it go? that only has smaller numbers of people. And basically what he's saying is
You
that...
should say where this information comes from.
Yeah, I'll get it once the stuff gets reloaded here on this interwebs. Here it is. Okay. So he says, Stanley then went on to criticize adults who prefer to go to a congregation that only has a couple hundred members, calling them selfish. Quote, when I hear adults say, well, I don't like big church. I like about 200. I want to be able to know everybody. I say, you are so stinking selfish. You care nothing about the next generation. All you care about is you and your 5 friends. You don't care about your kids or anyone else's kids. And so he went on to apologize for this.
He sort of half apologized
in a tweet. He said
he didn't say that he was wrong. He said that he was sorry for how harshly he put it. But the fact of the matter, what he was trying to communicate, he still affirms.
The negative reaction to the clip from last weekend's message is entirely justified. Heck, even I was offended by what I said. I apologize. That's what he tweeted.
And where I read about it, he apologized for the harsh language, but not for the assertion.
For the meaning.
Right. So it's a sorry, not sorry.
Right.
Well,
sorry that I said
offended.
it like a jerk, but what I said stands.
Yeah.
I don't know. The one
that doesn't. I don't think that tweet agrees with your interpretation of that. But so anyway, the question becomes, what merit is there to being a big church? To what he said, is there any merit? What are some of our initial reactions to this?
I think it was completely inappropriate and unacceptable for him to assume that. I went on to read. He says that the kids hate those kinds of churches, and you're raising by belonging to a small church, you're raising kids to hate church, and no wonder why when they become young adults they stop going to church. I think that is completely ignorant to think that is the reason why students grow up not going to church because it was a small church. I think that it's almost go as far as say that it's almost the opposite. Value. I mean, when we look at education, we would prefer smaller student to teacher ratios for better education,
right.
for a better relationship. But when it comes to youth ministry, we want one pastor and 400 kids. Like I don't. I mean, he has thousands of students involved in their youth group, and I'm not saying they're not well ministered to, but I am going to imply that having a smaller group of students to 1 or 2 or however many leaders, there's also plenty of positives in those situations for spiritual development in a student and a child. So I think that his basis for saying that large churches are better for students is completely ungrounded.
What do you think, James?
I think he's completely missing the point of the church. The point of the church is not to serve people in that way. I mean, the church itself should be serving the community. The church itself should be serving other people. But as far as who's in that church, it's supposed to be an outward service. And the way he's treating it, so the point of the church is to serve church members, whether they be kids or adults. Right? No, the point of coming together as a church is to serve God and serve others outside the church. Right, and then if people inside the church need help, it's not like we don't help them either, right? We help everybody.
Right, it's not necessarily an either or.
Right, but the idea is that if he's speaking as if the primary role of a church is to serve church members, and that's not the primary role. The primary role is the Great Commission.
Right,
the Great Commission is to bring God's will and to preach the gospel and to live the gospel in wherever we are. And to worship God, and both through praise and worship and song and other types of worship, and also to worship via service to the community and to those who need that service in and outside the church. But to make what he's talking of the church as if it's a social club, right? And so as a social club, we want to be as big as possible so we can have the best social club. Well, that's not what the church is. It's not what church is at all.
Like he's trying to get you to sign up at his gym. We have the best daycare.
Right.
You're fat. Poet.
And it's hard for us to make some of those assumptions, James, just because we don't know how the ministry is run once the people or the students are there. I mean, I would assume at a church that size, it's in a very attractional model. I mean, almost to the point that you probably blur the line between member and guest every Sunday because maybe half the people there are guests in some sense. Like maybe they've been there less than 5 times, whatever you would consider a guest, But I would make the assumption that, and this is true in where the youth ministry is heading, is that the attractional model actually produces more non-Christians after they graduate than any other model youth ministry's ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, it's not heading there. It's there. It's already there. So I do want to.
My question is, what is it attracting them to? A lot of the mega churches I've visited,
Entertainment.
were filled with very friendly people. But what the attraction was, you have a great time while you're here, and there's nothing wrong with having a great time in church. I hope a lot of
It's
people
more
have
like a
great time in church.
concert or a.
Right. And that's fine. But yeah, you're right. Smaller churches can't afford some of those awesome attractions, but smaller churches can still do the Great Commission. And that's the primary goal.
Right. And I do, there is some merit to what he's saying here. There is some value in what he's saying. It's the fact that it's how he said it that especially.
What's the value? What
if
do you think the value is?
There is good value in being able to have enough students that you can separate middle school and high school. The fact that you're allowed and able to speak to more age-appropriate issues there. The kids that I have that are 11 are not necessarily dealing with the same issue that the kids that I have that are 18. So there is a little bit of merit in terms of being able to want enough people in your church, in your group, that you can separate, your youth specifically. But that's not accomplished by necessarily being a bigger church. That's accomplished
Correct.
by what James is saying is successfully participating in the Great
I
Commission.
mean, we even did that at Westside. We
Right.
would do small groups, even though we were a small church to
And
start
so,
with like
like
3 or
10
4 of
students.
us.
And
Yeah.
that's the funny thing that
8 students.
Andy Stanley is a big proponent of life groups, of small groups, of discipleship groups, whatever group that you call it. And so I just think it's funny at that point where it's like you're arguing for the sake of a bigger church, a more production-y type church. But at
Doesn't
the
need
end,
to
you're
be-
still breaking it down into like the very thing that you're criticizing almost. So I think the problem, though, that we see when you become too big, especially in evangelical, conservative, Caucasian-dominant churches, silo ministries start to happen where each ministry operates individually of the other ones, and then they all just come together and kind of meet in the same building.
And all these church members that don't actually know each other.
Right, and so, and this is actually kind of funny, the last part of this. So you can find this article at christianpost.com. The title is Andy Stanley Apologizes for Saying People Who Go to Small Churches Are So Stinking Selfish, and it's written by Michael Grybowski. And so he cites a study that was authored by a Duke University researcher named David Eagle, who found that the larger the congregation, the less active its membership. And he says there's a negative relationship between size and the probability of attendance for conservative, mainline, and black Protestant, and for Catholics in parishes larger than 500 attenders. So the addition of control variables do not change these patterns, and these results support the theory that group cohesion lies at the heart of the size participation relationship in churches. And what's interesting about this is a church
All true.
not only is it all true, but you see it demonstrated so well in the life of Saddleback's Church by Rick Warren for a number of years there. It was a church of over 10,000 people, right? But over 80% of people were in small groups there, like were actually registered to be a part of the small group. And that's where the life part happens, and that's the interesting thing there. So I don't want to come down on him too hard because I do.
I mean, to be honest, I think he was offended. He's offended when people he knows, maybe personally, don't want to go to his church because they prefer a smaller church. So he's offended and getting defensive, and he totally took a shot at like a jab at smaller churches with his perception of something they can't offer that his church offers.
But to be fair, I mean, there's merit in that on the other side too, because I've heard people speak in that way in a selfish tone, and it's the tone that he's criticizing there, right? Where the parents have their kids involved in a church that's less suitable and helpful. Your thing is ringing.
Going all Super Mario.
I was
on
like,
us.
what is
yeah,
that
but
in
it's
the
like
back?
16 feet away.
So anyhow, there is some merit in that because there are people that I personally know who keep their families in small churches,
And inside
even
of
though
UMaster.
even though there's nothing for the students there, right? And because the parents have relationships that they don't want to
So
necessarily.
would you
let
say
go of.
missionaries are selfish?
No, I'd say the heart of the missionary is different though.
But what if they have children?
I don't see how that applies to what we're.
That's the
talking
same
about.
thing.
Yeah, because I grew up in tiny churches. My altar call, or the altar call I came forward at, was in a living room.
Right.
There was no kids program. There was no youth program.
Right, but I think the
There's
call.
just, like,
I think the
40
call
people
on
in
the
a living
missional
room.
family is different than the call of somebody who just works in a 9-to-5 regular office job. that doesn't desire to go outside of their comfort
Yeah,
zone.
but the missional family is disregarding the needs according to his definition of needs of the youth.
Yeah, and I do think there are actually problems with that. If you cite TCK studies, over 90% of third culture kids that grow up as missionaries have nothing to do with ministry once they hit 18. And those are the types of people that need to be going back into ministry and doing that type of stuff. So,
But
yeah,
I don't think an entertaining church is creating the sort of Christian anybody wants.
And I'm not arguing for an entertaining church. I'm arguing for a better divide between what we're criticizing about what he's saying versus what's actually being spewed on him for. And so his
but he didn't make it sound like he didn't.
right.
He didn't
and, so,
clarify.
and that's where my biggest
didn't
problem
say,
lies with how he said, not
right.
what he said.
I mean, if you're taking your kids to a church with 0 children's program or teen program, just so you can have your 5 friends, then I guess in that specific situation, yeah, maybe it's better off that you go to a church that has a better
that has a youth program, not necessarily a giant
correct
entertainment.
But I
model.
mean, churches did he use the number 200? I mean, the last few churches I've been involved at have been less than 300 in average attendance, and our youth programs were excellent, as I might say. No, but I mean, I split up the kids, junior high and high school in the first program. Right now, we're only running like 11 students, so they're not split right now, but they will be as soon as they could be. But there are a lot of churches between 200 and 20,000, however many his church has.
I've seen churches of 100 have a divide between their middle school and their high school. I mean, that's a pretty common thing.
And you can make that at any level. I think the essence of what he's saying isn't necessarily wrong. I just wish how he said it would have been done a lot better, and it would have just saved a lot.
I do think
trouble.
it's wrong, though. Honestly,
he's way
I
too
think the
personally-
essence of what he's saying is incorrect.
I agree.
I mean, it's sort of like saying, what it is it's not that entertaining kids is in any way bad, and what his church provides is bad. It's just that if we're talking about what's the goal of the church, and we're judging churches, judge them by the primary goal, and the primary goal isn't to entertain youth.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we think that entertaining youth is a good model for creating faith. I think we all know that doesn't really work out most of the time. I think great pastors who take an interpersonal approach to their youth that's the model.
That certainly does involve entertainment.
No. Well, I mean, you can have fun with them, but
Yeah.
that's not the same thing as having a huge income to like produce a giant program.
I totally
You can
agree.
have a 0 income and have great interpersonal connections, and I think that with the budgets afforded to both of you, you do a very good job of that. And you don't need a mega church budget, right, to do that. You don't need these programs the way Anley Stanley is imagining them.
I mean, I agree with you, but I have to be careful that we don't judge. I don't really know how he runs his youth programs, and they could be hyper interpersonal. He could have
But I'm just saying
6,000 students, but have 600 youth
But
pastors.
I'm saying that the goal the goal that we should be after doesn't require these big budgets.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. There's not an automatic with a big church doesn't automatically equal better than little church because you have more students.
Right.
There.
Right.
And so greater numbers doesn't necessarily equal greater depth.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't think I wouldn't disagree with that. But there is something to the idea of there is a value. There's a great value in being able to have enough to separate middle and high schoolers. That's my bottom line point.
To a point. I mean, it's hard to ask families to leave their church because they don't have those
Absolutely.
things.
And I would never do so. Actually, instead of leaving your church, you should create that. If there's a need that needs to be done by that, go and fill that need, right? That's our basic thing. So, so bonehead move, Andy. But he's human. So I still like
We
your
think
I still like
Illuminati.
your
Watch
stuff.
out, lizard people.
I still love his premise. All right, Bernie Sanders. What's up, my dude? I'm feeling the burn. Went to the doctor, and he said that was okay. So Bernie Sanders quoted as saying in the last Democratic primary, "When you're white, you don't know what it's like to be poor."
I hate it when stuff like that is said.
By Louis Jacobson, and this article is found at PolitiFact.com.
Where did the Burns say this?
At a debate.
At a debate with Hillary. So, I think this is pretty interesting. And
from a white guy. I mean,
again,
that's-
I
From
might
a poor white guy until he got into government.
I might be a little bit off base here, but I think we're kind of blowing this comment out of proportion. So I might be the
You're the
minority.
one bringing it up.
Yeah, well, the news. I might be in the minority on this again. But let me read this to you real fast.
it is a popular thing to be said right now, whether Bernie meant it or not. It's a popular thing to be said that if you're white and male, you just have no idea about real life struggles. And the thing is, there's real life struggles that come with being certain ethnicities in this country, being of certain social classes.
And I think that's the point that he's making.
These things are real, but you can also have real life struggles as a poor white male. You can have real life struggles as anything.
Yeah.
There are some people who are born into a family of privilege and maybe experience less according to everybody else, but
plenty of them have struggles, and plenty
Right.
of them have to take their lives and have depression and have wrecked families. And
you can go to the
alcoholism.
Midwest, go to very, very poor parts of the country that are still almost all white,
Kentucky.
and
Appalachia.
see some real poverty, some real starvation, some real problems. Right? This isn't. Don't make don't make being white and male some kind of now automatic privilege.
But look
right?
at the other side too, that only minorities are poor.
Right.
So you're saying that this is a problem that only people of color face.
Right.
So is there something wrong with people of color? Is that what he's saying basically? That they're the only ones who can be poor?
Right.
Yeah. It seems like a automatic, because you're a minority. Oh, not Asian, by the way, because Asians are quite successful. Because you're a minority, it's okay that you're poor and you struggle with that because it's your
Almost
race.
like it's standard.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah.
expect that of them. So here's some interesting. So here's a little bit of a synopsis of what he said, and then here's some statistics to be aware of. Sanders' point was that white people haven't had to contend with racism based on skin color, but when he moves into the subject of whites' experience
Except
with
for
poverty, he's on weak ground. Sanders' suggestion that white Americans haven't experienced poverty is undercut by statistics calculated by the U.S. Census Bureau. So Americans of all races, of numbers of people in poverty, 46.7 million. So the poverty rate is 14.8% in the country, which really hasn't moved that much since 65. White is 19.7 million, which is 10.1%. African American is 10.8 million, which accounts for 26.2%. So that's pretty high. Hispanic is 13.1, which is 23.6%, and Asian American is 2.1, which is 12%. And so by this measure, the article states, Sanders was certainly wrong to suggest that whites haven't experienced poverty. In 2014, there were actually more white Americans in poverty, 19.7 million, than members of any other group. And part of that, of course, is due to the fact that Americans still account for over 60% of the population in the country.
White people.
White
people still. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, white Americans, yeah.
Right.
So still, even though whites have a lower poverty rate than any other groups, roughly 10%, even that percentage is hardly trivial.
Yeah. The way I think about it, and I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong, but this is what I'm convinced of at the moment. It's that
Bernie Sanders hates white people.
Is that there are privileged groups for which there is more privilege available, and it happens right now today that there are a lot of white people in those privileged groups, but there are non-privileged groups of which there's less opportunity available, and those have a lot of ethnicities and white people in them. Mm-hmm. And so this is more of a social status problem, of which it's almost I don't want to say incidental, because that would be the wrong word, but it's not really ethnicity isn't at the heart of the problem. It's just something that happens to be an aspect of the problem.
Yeah.
That the real problem is there's a social and economic divide between different groups.
Well,
am I
it's
making
more
sense?
nuanced than just
Right.
oh, this person's white, this person's black. I mean, everything's just breaking it down and dividing people so simply, but it's such a complex and nuanced issue.
Right.
But his statement, I mean, was that his statement when you said at the beginning of your when you were reading it that what he really meant was white people have not experienced.
Yeah,
the
so
racial-
his specific statement was, quote, when you're white, you don't know what it's like to be poor. And I think what he was, and the greater context of that was he was at a rally and he was talking with somebody who was black, and they told him that the types of racism that they see go far just beyond police shootings. There, they see bullies by police officers for people for being black. Just the contention that lies within the heart of being in the ghetto there. And so he was basically saying, look, we don't have to necessarily go through that to the same degree because we're white. There, we don't have to.
Sure.
We don't understand. I think what he was trying to say, in my own interpretation of it, was that we don't understand what it's like to be black because we're white in
Right.
there. And so obviously it was
he said
it was
that
kind of a
pretty poorly.
misstep. Yeah,
He should have
very-
said, he should have said when
Yeah,
you're
very-
white, you don't
pull
know
up the
what
whole
it's like
quote.
to be
Yeah, let me pull
judged
up
by
the-
your race. I mean, to the same degree, not even
I
at all.
still don't think that's true. it's definitely true.
Yeah, I mean,
that
at
there
its
is a-
face, it's true because we're white and we're not black, so we don't understand the black experience. Like,
That's
okay,
true.
fair enough.
But
That's not revolutionary.
But there are white people who have gotten themselves into sticky, or not gotten themselves, but have found themselves in sticky situations because they were white. Like, I actually had a friend that was like beat up for being white, like severely beat up. I mean, it doesn't happen that often. Certainly doesn't make it into the news as far as I can see. But these things do happen. We have a terrible problem with police brutality, certainly, and a lot of there's definitely a minority. There's a problem in this country concerning treatment of minorities. That goes without saying. But don't let the pendulum swing so far that you forget that that's not the only problem in this country.
Or like what Chris said.
That's
don't
a
let it swing
big
so-
problem among other big problems.
Correct. You can't
Right.
blame it all on that.
Right. And I've seen it myself, not experienced it, seen it, where I remember in college, I was driving. I wasn't the one driving. I was in the back seat of a car, and my friend was black, and he was driving, and he got pulled over by a cop while I was in the car. And yes, that cop was crazy to him.
Really?
I mean, I've been pulled over plenty of times, and the police officer comes, and police officers always try to be intimidating, but they're intimidating in a very stoic way, usually, right? Like license and registration, usually try to say something like, "You're going real fast," and you're like, "I wasn't going that fast," but whatever. Right? You get the intimidation tactics, but they aren't extreme; they're more stoic, right? But when, in this particular instance, when the police officer came to the car, and this is in Fullerton, California, like North Orange County, not a dangerous place. It was actually Placentia, but still, same thing. The first thing the officer said when he got to the window was, "Everybody put your hands on the ceiling." We all had to put our hands on the ceiling. And it was because my black friend was the driver. And he was, the verbal tone was much nastier. It was really awful. I was and it was very eye-opening to me. So there really is a problem
Sure,
here.
that's racism.
The funny end of that story, though, is we were on our way to 7-Eleven. And when we got to the 7-Eleven, I'm the only one who went in. And then that same police officer walked in too.
Oh.
And
Hello, sir.
No, he didn't see me because I was
How's
in
it
the
going,
back.
man?
I was in the back, like going through the drinks or whatever there in the back. And the police officer went to the cash register, and he was talking to the guy behind the cash register and gloating about how he scared the crap out of some college kids.
Oh my god.
And I was like, that was me. That's me he's talking about.
So maybe it wasn't racism. Maybe he was just bored and messing with you guys.
Yeah, but I
Ageism. It was ageism.
I mean, it could have been, but I do think...
But there's also, like you were saying earlier, the class component.
Right, there's a class component,
When we
too.
moved out here
Yeah.
to Orange County, like when I was I grew up in Long Beach more or less, and I got pulled over a couple times, and every time I got pulled over, I was speeding. So I'd never held a grudge on that.
Right.
It was all my fault. But in Orange County, like I would be walking to the store, and there was a stretch for about a year. I got stopped by the police 9 times walking to the store. And I know why. It's because I look like a tweaker.
It's because you're black.
No, it's because I look like a tweaker. I'm skinny. I'd be working on my car and walk over to the store to get a soda. And I'm skinny and tattooed. And they have had problems in the area with meth and that sort of thing. And so I would get stopped. I'd get sat on the curb, get the stupid game they play where they ask you the same questions in different ways to try and make you trip up or whatever. Have all my pockets emptied, be made late for work, that kind of thing, be accused of lying. They'd always ask me who my parole officer was or when I got out, all these things. And I've never been to prison. And apparently cops around here can't tell the difference between prison tattoos and expensive tattoos. But as soon as I started dressing differently, I haven't been stopped by a cop since. So I dress a little nicer now, and you can't see my tattoos a lot of the time and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I haven't been stopped at all.
So what you learned here on Faith and Whatever is to all you druggies out there, just start dressing nicer
Yeah.
and
Drive vans,
you
family
won't get
vans.
pulled over.
Make
so
sure you
much.
have vans that have windows on them, though.
How do they?
I said family vans.
Yeah. That's
How do they make drugs in the back if there's windows in it?
I'm looking for the exact quote, but I can't quite seem to.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Oh, yeah, here it is. When you're white, you don't know what it's like to be living in a ghetto.
Unless
you don't
you
know
do
what
live
it's
in a
like to be
ghetto.
poor. You don't know what it's like to be hassled when you walk down the street or you get dragged out of a car. And I believe that as a nation in the year 2016, we must be firm in making it clear we will end institutional racism, which is shooting for the stars, and reform a broken criminal justice system. There. So you don't know what it's like to be poor. You don't know what it's like to live in a ghetto.
feel like
Remind
that
me, where was
statement-
the first ghetto?
And
Yeah, I feel like that statement's slightly
what was
racist.
where was the first ghetto?
Jewish ghetto.
Jewish ghetto. Got it.
Yeah.
Well,
That's
that-
a Jewish term.
We'll
by the
end
way,
racism
folks.
with a slightly
Got it.
racist comment about overgeneralization of white people. There's plenty of white people who live in the ghetto, so I don't understand. If you're in the ghetto and you hear that, you're like, what? I live in the ghetto. Like,
I think it's more interesting that for all the work that we've done in the war on poverty, the rate hasn't really changed in 50 years.
the needle has been between 10 and 15% since 1965.
So how's Bernie Sanders going to change it?
And he's not just gonna change it, Broham. He's gonna end it.
He's gonna yell it into submission.
He's gonna.
I
Do
thought
it.
that was the Donald Trump plan.
Trump?
Just yell at everything.
They are remarkably similar.
It's going to be
when you
huge.
think about it.
They both speak the same way. Huge.
And I like Bernie Sanders, so I'm not being a jerk about
Well,
it.
you also like Donald Trump, but you told us you were going to vote
I
for
do
him.
not.
Everybody, James is voting for Donald Trump. Everybody, James is voting for Trump. Get him. All right. So
you can't judge people who vote for Donald Trump because if he gets a nomination, it's going to be some tough choices.
well, this
out there.
podcast will be illegal once he wins the nomination. So
Not illegal, but people can sue us easier.
gonna get my shots in now. All right, and then here's the last news segment of today.
Broadcasting live from an undisclosed location.
Pirate Radio. Hillary Clinton is taking a new tack in boosting her image in the Democratic presidential campaign. She acknowledged, this article is from thehill.com and written by Niall Stanage and Amy Parnes. She acknowledged that she is not a natural politician on the Sirius XM radio show The Mayor. She said, "This is harder for me. I admire the skills my husband and President Obama have. They're charismatic and they're compelling and they're great orators. I
hate that word too.
Orators.
Orators.
Orators. I do get up every day and say, what can I do to try and make someone's life better? That's not true.
That's so sweet.
Few objective observers.
But it's her own life she's talking about.
I'm
She's
talking to
about
the
herself in
person
third
in
person.
the mirror. It's an attempt, maybe successful, to get people to see her less as a politician and more of a personality. And so Hillary Clinton's been criticized for this in the past, being a little
Cold politician.
Yeah, a little robot-y. And, I'm sure she has feelings. She's a woman. I feel sad that her husband cheated on her. That was probably an awful thing to go through. Or maybe just because it's got out, it was awful. I don't know. But, is there merit to seeming more human when we're discussing our politicians? Do we want... there is merit. I don't think we would all assume that.
I mean,
But
there's
to
definitely
what level-
there's definitely like political value.
Yeah, but I mean, for us as the consumer of politicos, political candidates, how much value should we give to the politicians' humanity, as it were, when picking those that we want to represent us in office? That is the question that I wanted to discuss out of this. So basically, in a Washington Post, ABC News-related poll, Clinton scored worse than Cruz and Rubio when representatives were asked to assess candidates' honesty and trustworthiness, and she did, however, beat Donald Trump on that question. And ironically enough, so did Charles Manson in that same poll. Just kidding, I made that up. So, what do you think? How much merit do we give?
Do you think that changes with the times a bit? Because like FDR famously covered up the fact that he was in a wheelchair, whereas now people want a more human leader. Where back in the day, kind of the
Stronger.
code hero, the manly man. If you're going to be a leader, you need to be a certain way and act a certain way and be
Well,
strong.
that was the anecdotal thought about George Bush Jr., right? That he gained the votes because people thought they could have a beer with him, right? That was the whole thing. They thought that he was a guy that I could relate to and have a beer with, and that was like
And
the
if you had
anecdotal
enough, he would
reason
tell you the
for why
codes
he
to the
won
buttons.
votes.
To the buttons.
So,
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. I think that to some degree, we need to feel like they're human. To me, it makes me think of politician versus non-politician, and I think at different times in our country we've wanted different types of leaders. I think she's trying to just get a few of those votes that people are saying, well, I'm voting for Trump because he's not a politician. I mean, they're not going to vote for Trump if they don't vote for Trump. You know what I mean? Like trying to appeal to that type of maybe audience that might
That
be
thought
out there.
process.
That might be out there in the Democrat.
I guess I might be again in the minority side on this because I don't really care how human my politician seems. If they're a good leader, I just want them to be. And I don't know if this is kind of a false analogy, but I kind of liken it to the doctor with terrible bedside manner. If my
You'd
doctor
rather
has,
just have a good doctor.
I don't care if they're nice to me or not nice to me. I want somebody who's just really good at their job. And I've noticed this come up a little bit with people who have been saying, well, I like the honest Donald Trump because at least, what is it, the snake versus the cat?
I was
thing.
telling you earlier.
Yeah,
I like rattlesnakes better than cats.
Because the rattlesnake warns you to stay the heck away from it, but a cat will pretend like it's your friend and it'll bite you. And like I look at that and I'm not convinced by that on a personal sentiment because it's just like they're still terrible. Like if one is just honestly terrible and one is dishonestly terrible, it makes it my job easier to identify the honestly terrible one. But at the same juncture, I would rather just not have a dishonest, terrible politician. I just want somebody, I don't care how warm they are. I just want them to be very excellent at their job.
Well, let's clarify this. This is something I find a lot of people don't know. And even I have to remind myself of all 7 of these. I usually can only remember 3 or 4 off the top of my head. But the U.S. president has 7 jobs, does 7 things, and exclusively these 7 things.
Lie, cheat, steal.
All right.
Greed, envy,
lust,
greedy.
That was a 7 deadly sins reference, people.
So the
Appreciate that.
U.S. president is the chief of state, and this is often like a term for the inspiring role of the U.S. president. How the U.S. president gives out medals and scholarships and does things that
The public relations
that
stuff.
sort of inspire the people. So that's a very important part. By the way, so when presidents do things that people claim like, oh, he's wasting his time, or that because he's only, he shouldn't be giving this speech in this place that doesn't matter. He should not be wasting his time in these certain things that only
Graduation speeches and
right.
things like that.
That's actually part of the U.S. president's job,
From
chief
the
of
South
state.
by Southwest.
Right. The number 2, he's the chief executive, or she, if we get somebody like Hilary who wins, chief executive. This is means that the U.S. president is the primary boss of all the government workers. So he's the boss of government workers. Ultimately, he's the CEO.
Like my mailman.
So he's my
Right.
boss.
3, he's the chief diplomat. So represents America. He's the chief representative of America to other
All over the
countries.
world.
Right. 4th, commander in chief. So head of the military. 5th, chief legislator, and in this case, it doesn't mean that he makes laws, but he has
them
the
into action.
right to
Prevent them.
do what it takes to influence Congress.
Yeah.
But even though Congress makes final decisions on laws, of course, he can veto. That's part of being chief legislator. He can veto certain things, and he can also put forth bills.
Executive action.
Right. But that doesn't mean he makes law. He doesn't make law. He can only propose law. 6, chief of party. So if the president
Get
is
down and have a good time.
so if it's a Democrat president, he's the chief of the Democrats. If it's a Republican president, he's the chief of the Republicans, and so forth. And 7, chief guardian of the economy. So it's his primary job to handle. It's his 7th.
By the
job
way,
is to handle
7
the economy.
things that are all far too big for one person to fill.
That's weird. I thought he had to. Also, the housekeeper of the White House, like he had to do vacuuming and. Oh, didn't know
So
that.
when you're voting for president, those are the 7 jobs you want this person to do well, right? Nothing else. These are the 7 things a president does, and does being a person you can have a beer with help any of these 7 things? Not really, right?
Yeah, public appearances and.
Yeah, I mean,
medals.
for
It's good
chief
for
of
the PR
state,
side of the gig.
Yeah.
Maybe not the economic side, but
right? You want somebody who's going to do these 7 things well. And then the reason why I don't like Trump, and it seems like a lot of people are growing to like Trump. I mean, if the sort of news out there is any
when
indicator,
Chris Christie surrendered his soul to make an endorsement for
Right.
him.
That was so sad looking.
What did I do?
and people I know make the argument for Trump based on they're saying the chief guardian of the economy. He's a good businessman. He'll fix the economy, right? As a businessman. And let's say that's true. Let's give that. I'm not sure that is true, but let's
I don't think it is.
It's
but-
not.
But-
It's not.
no, but I'm just saying let's give that argument. What about the other 6 roles?
He'd be a great
Right, what about-
representative.
Overseas.
His presidents would be huge.
Imagine how many.
I'm just gonna see how many times I'm gonna work that.
How
out.
many people he would
countries can
offend
be
in every
banned
little
from?
speech.
Yeah. By the way, fun fact: Mexico City banned Trump from entering in their
Mexico
territory.
City?
Yeah, so they're hoping that the president will make that official.
I can't wait to hear his response to that.
They're
Yeah.
trash. So
I'm sure it'll be great.
as you sign the petition to keep Trump out of your city, make sure to head on over to faithandwhatever.com, and you can find us there. We would love to interact with you. I know we went a little bit long in our news segment But it was worth it for me to communicate my point of Andy Stanley being right. So, all right, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. He's not right. I don't think he's right. Stop it.
Andy, you can come on here and we can talk
And
about
defend
it.
yourself. Actually,
That'd be wonderful. Andy, come defend yourself.
I am defending you, Mr. Stanley.
Come at us, bro.
All right. So, bye-bye.